She was an advocate for the poor, a champion for the homeless, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is Tyrone Bowman Tonight. This evening I'm talking about Dorothy Day. Let's profile her and get into her story. Dorothy Day was born on the 8th of November of 1897, and she passed away on the 29th of November of 1980. She was an American journalist, social activist, and anarchist, who after a bohemian youth became a Catholic without abandoning her social and anarchist activism. She was perhaps the best known political radical among American Catholics. Dorothy's conversion is described in her 1952 autobiography, The Long Loneliness. Day was also an active journalist and described her social activism in her writings. In 1917, she was imprisoned as a member of Suffragist Alice Paul's nonviolent Silent Sentinels. In the 1930s, Day worked closely with fellow activist Pt.1 to establish the Catholic Worker Movement, a pacifist movement that combines direct aid for the poor and homeless with nonviolent direct action on their behalf. She practiced civil disobedience, which led to additional arrests in 1955, 1957, and 1973 at the age of 75. As part of the Catholic Worker Movement, Day co-founded the Catholic Worker newspaper in 1933 and served as its editor from 1933 until her death in 1980. In this newspaper, Day advocated the Catholic economic theory of distributionism, which she considered a third way between capitalism and socialism. Pope Benedict XVI used her conversion story as an example of how to journey towards faith. In a secularized environment, in an address before the United States Congress, Pope Francis included her in a list of 4 exemplary Americans who built a better future. The Catholic Church has opened the case for Day's possible canonization, which was accepted by the Holy See for investigation. For that reason, the Church refers to her with the title of Servant of God. Dorothy May Day was born on November 8, 1897 in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. She was born into a family described by one biographer as solid patriotic and middle class. Her father, John Day, was a Tennessee native of Irish heritage. While her mother, Grace Satterley, a native of upstate New York, was of English ancestry. Her parents were married in an Episcopal church in Greenwich Village. She had 3 brothers, including Donald S. Day, and a sister. Was the 3rd oldest child. In 1904, her father, a sports writer devoted to horse racing, took a position with a newspaper in San Francisco. The family lived in Oakland, California until the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, which destroyed the newspaper's facilities, and her father lost his job. From the spontaneous response to the earthquake's devastation, the self-sacrifice of neighbors in a time of crisis, Day drew a lesson about individual action and the Christian community. The family relocated to Chicago. Day's parents were nominal Christians who rarely attended church. As a young child, she showed a marked religious streak, reading the Bible frequently. When she was 10, she started to attend the Church of Our Savior, an Episcopal church in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago, after its rector convinced her mother to let Day's brothers join the church choir. She was taken with the liturgy and its music. She studied the catechism and was baptized and confirmed in that church in 1911. Day was an avid reader in her teens, particularly fond of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. She worked from one book to another, noting Jack London's mention of Herbert Spencer in Martin Eden, then from Spencer to Darwin in Huxley. She learned about anarchy and extreme poverty from Peter Kropotkin, who promoted a belief in cooperation in contrast to Darwin's competition for survival. She also enjoyed Russian literature, while in university studies, especially Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Gorky. Day read a lot of socially conscious work, which gave her a background for her future. It helped bolster her support for and involvement in social activism. Day graduated from Robert Waller High School in 1914. In 1914, Day attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Champaign, on a scholarship. She was a reluctant scholar. Her reading was chiefly in a Christian radical social direction. She avoided campus social life and supported herself rather than rely on money from her father, buying all her clothing and shoes from discount stores. She left the university after 2 years and moved to New York City. She settled on the Lower East Side of New York and worked on the staff of several socialist publications, including The Liberator, The Masses, The Call. She smilingly explained to impatient socialists that she was a pacifist, even in the class war. Years later, Day described how she was pulled in different directions. I was only 18, so I wavered between my allegiance to socialism, syndicalism of the Industrial Workers of the World, or IWW, and anarchism. When I read Tolstoy, I was an anarchist. My allegiance to the call kept me a socialist, although a left-wing one, and my Americanism included me into the IWW movement. She celebrated the February Revolution in Russia in 1917, the overthrow of the monarchy, and establishment of a reformist government. In November 1917, she was arrested for picketing at the White House on behalf of women's suffrage, as part of a campaign called the Silent Sentinels, organized by Alice Paul and the National Women's Party. Sentenced to 30 days in jail, she served 15 days before being released, 10 of them on a hunger strike. Day spent several months in Greenwich Village, where she became close to Eugene O'Neill, whom she later credited with having produced an intensification of the religious sense that was in me. She had a love affair of several years with Mike Gold, a radical writer who later became a prominent communist. Later, she credited Gold with being indirectly involved in the beginning of the Catholic worker movement. They maintained friendships with such prominent American communists as Anna Louise Strong and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, who became the head of the Communist Party USA. Initially, they lived a bohemian life. In 1920, after ending an unhappy love affair with Lincoln Moyse, and after having an abortion that was the great tragedy of her life, she married Berkeley Toby. In a civil ceremony. She spent the better part of a year with him in Europe, removed from politics, focusing on art and literature, and writing a semi-autobiographical novel, the 11th version, in 1924. Based on her affair with Moyse in its foliage, she tried to draw lessons about the status of women from her experience. Quote, I thought I was a free and emancipated young woman and found out I wasn't at all. Freedom is just a manatee grown, a new trapping that we women affect to capture the man we want. She ended her marriage to Toby upon their return to the United States. Day later called the 11th version a very bad book. The sale of the movie rights to the novel gave her $2,500, and she bought a beach cottage as a writing retreat on Staten Island, New York. Soon she found a new lover, Foster Batterham, an activist and biologist, who joined her there on weekends. She lived there from 1925 to 1929, entertaining friends and enjoying a romantic relationship that foundered when she took passionately to motherhood and religion. Day, who had thought herself sterile following her abortion, was delighted to find she was pregnant in mid-1925, while Batterham dreaded fatherhood. While she visited her mother in Florida, separating from Batterham for several months, she intensified her exploration of Catholicism. When she returned to Staten Island, Batterham found her increasing devotion attended at Mass and religious reading incomprehensible. Soon after the birth of their daughter, Tamar Teresa, on March 4, 1926, they encountered a local Catholic religious sister, Sister Alocia, and with her help educated herself in the Catholic faith and had her baby baptized in July 1927. Batterham refused to attend the ceremony. His relationship with Day became increasingly unbearable, as her desire for marriage in a Catholic church confronted his antipathy to organized religion. Catholicism, most of all. After one last fight in late December, Day refused to allow him to return. On December 28th, she underwent conditional baptism in the Catholic Church with Sister Alocia as her godparent. In the summer of 1929, to put Batterham behind her, Day accepted a job writing film dialogue for PATH Motion Pictures and moved to Los Angeles with Tamar. After a few months later, following the 1929 stock market crash, her contract was not renewed. She returned to New York via sojourn in Mexico and a family visit in Florida. Day supported herself as a journalist, writing a gardening column for the local paper, the Staten Island Advance, and feature articles and book reviews for several Catholic publications, including Common Weal. In 1932, inspired by conversations with Mike Gold's brother George, a leader of the upcoming Hunger March in Washington, D.C., she traveled to Washington to report on the March for Common Weal. Her experience there motivated her decision to take a greater role in social activism and Catholicism. During the hunger strikes in D.C. in December 1932, she wrote of being filled with pride watching the marchers, but she could not do much with her conversion. She comments in her autobiography, "I could write, I could protest to arouse the conscience, but where was the Catholic leadership in the gathering of bands of men and women together for the actual works of mercy that the comrades had already made part of their technique in reaching the workers?" Later, she visited the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Northeast D.C. to offer a prayer to find a way to use her gifts and talents to help her fellow workers and the poor. In part 2 of the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, Dorothy Day, I'll be talking about the founding of the Catholic Worker Movement, and also we'll discuss many intricate aspects of Day's life. Never surrender, never quit.